moments away. Christy Wilhelmi, author, well-known, self-identified gardener. But first, a message from our good friends at Rise Gardens.
Rise Gardens is a revolutionary hydroponic gardening system for your home. Instead of food traveling hundreds or even over 1,000 miles before it hits your plate, harvest the veggies, herbs, and greens you need for dinner tonight in the comfort of your home. No green thumb required knowledge. Gardening made easy with the Rise Gardens app. Step-by-step guidance from seed to harvest. A complete garden on a shelf comes with everything you need to grow healthy and the freshest food for you and your loved ones. Fully customize your garden to your needs and preferences. For more information and to get your garden, visit risegardens.com.
Holly, let's go to the hotline and bring in our guest for this week.
Yes, Christy Wilhelmi is the driving force behind GardenNerd.com. Christy believes that gardening unifies both physical activity and healthy food choices while providing a grounding, spiritual, and creative outlet. She has dedicated herself to the study of organic gardening and its benefits. She is an author, speaker, and more. She's written 5 books, and her latest gardening book, most recent gardening book, is Grow Your Own Mini Fruit Garden. Welcome to the program, Christy.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be back.
Well, thank you for coming back on. And I'll start with this. For people who are not aware, your background is in dance, theater, and drama. How did you turn it into the Garden Nerd? How did you get that title? How did you acquire that self-identification?
I was a dancer my whole life, and somewhere along the way, when I started this, I just discovered the wonder of growing food from seed, and then after I was injured, and that took me out of dance, I had already started Garden Nerd as a business. And it just sort of took off from there. It filled the space from where dance and theater left off. And my degree in theater has helped me with my YouTube videos and like camera presence and being a voice on a podcast and that kind of thing. So it's not gone to waste, even though I'm not dancing anymore.
Is this one of these things that you look back on and go, maybe I was supposed to get out of dance, that accident or that injury caused me, and that's where my next step was supposed to be in life, was the Garden Nerd world?
I think it really lent itself to moving into gardening. I feel like the timing was just so that, Garden Nerd was building as my dance career was winding down. It was sort of a passing of the baton. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether it was supposed to happen or not, but that's kind of how it turned out.
Well, fantastic. So we all learn from each other. That is why we bring people on the show. What would you like to share the benefits of using worm castings around your plants and how they can eliminate aphids?
I love worm castings because they are both a fertilizer and a pest control. And I've talked about this kind of everywhere I go, so I'm hoping that it's mainstream by now. But in case it's not, there's an enzyme in worm castings because worms don't have teeth. They have enzymatic mouth parts, and so they dissolve the food they consume. And that enzyme is called chitinase, and it passes through their digestive system into their castings. And so when you apply worm castings to your plants that are having problems with sucking insects like aphids, mealybugs, whitefly, leafhoppers, the plant takes up that chitinase and passes it out into its leaves. And so when sucking insects start to siphon off the juices inside a plant, they're taking up that chitinase, and it happens to be an enzyme that dissolves the exoskeletons of those insects. So it wards off insects that insects that suck. There are some other types of insect frass that trigger the plant's own production of chitin, which does the same thing. So it's good to have around if you're having any kind of aphid infestation or mealybugs on the undersides of your citrus trees or anything like that. My first go-to is to put down worm castings as a pest control instead of a fertilizer.
Now, you may not know the answer to this, and I may put you on the spot. What about these jumping worms that we're all seeing across the country? There's not an answer to the elimination of them, and they're invading the native worms. So ultimately, when you add those two together, it doesn't end well.
Yeah, we don't have them here in California, thank God, right now. But I hear about how they are really causing a lot of problems. My first thought in my process when I come across a problem, an insect problem or a worm or whatever, is that I go in search of a natural predator for it. And usually that's some kind of a nematode, a beneficial nematode, or something in the soil food web family that will help trigger it or weaken it in some way. And I haven't done any research around that yet, but there's got to be something out there that people can help fortify their soil with, like, something you can add to your compost tea probably that will help ward them off or reduce the populations or interrupt the life cycle in some way. But you have put me on the spot. I'll have to go research that.
Well, you talked about compost, so let's talk about composting. It's easy if you with a big pile and the right equipment to turn it, but many of us don't have that luxury of having equipment of that magnitude. Most of us have small backyards, limited amount of space. So what are some easy ways we can all compost in that small area in our backyards? Yeah,
if you don't have room for, typical compost bins are usually 3 by 3 by 3, a cubic yard. And if you don't have space for that and hopefully space next to it of the same size, so like a 3 by 6 area, to turn the pile from one place to another, I highly recommend vermicomposting because that takes up a smaller footprint. Usually it's only about 2 feet by 2 feet. And I know someone who's even kept their worm bin in their closet in their apartment or, out on your balcony or patio. It takes in less food waste than compost bins do, but it's a start and it's some way that you can generate some really good compost, like we were just talking about, those worm castings, really essential foods for the garden and great pest control too. But if you don't even have room for that, composting in place is something that's been done forever and really easy to do. Some people will puree their food scraps or chop them up really small. I know some folks who keep them in a bag in the freezer until they have enough to go out and dig a hole in the ground. You can bury them directly in your raised beds, but if you have critters, just make sure it's a foot down at least. And then, keep track of where you're burying stuff in a trough or in each raised bed. And then when you come back to that space, like if you're going to bury stuff, don't plant in that space for a couple of months. But eventually you'll have this beautifully broken down fecund soil that will accept the next thing you plant in that space, and it will thrive.
That's great information. So you do have a novel that came out in 2022 called Garden Variety, but your newest garden book is Grow Your Own Mini Fruit Garden. What can our listeners expect when they pick up a copy, and maybe if there's a unique tip or something that would be notable to pique their interest?
Yeah. So Grow Your Own Mini Fruit Garden is all about growing fruit in small spaces, and I do include ideas that will work for people who are growing in containers on patios or small spaces like that. A lot of the concepts that I talk about are around backyard orchard culture, which is something that is very different from where most of our fruit tree gardening information comes from. Most of the time, textbooks and gardening books are written with the information that's been used in farming fruit trees, kind of big areas, and they prune in a vase shape because that's how it's easier to harvest. But for a home gardener who doesn't have a lot of space from, along one wall or on a patio, a vase shape is not necessarily the most efficient pruning shape that you'll want for that tree because it's going to take up so much room width-wise, you don't have room for any others. So it's a kind of a nice concept to focus on keeping the tree under, I like to keep mine between 8 and 10 feet tall, so I don't need a ladder to climb up and harvest, or maybe just a step stool. And this book focuses on all the techniques that are really, truly for home gardeners, not for farmers, not for orchardists, not for commercial production, and not from a university ag research perspective. It's all stuff that home gardeners can implement with their balconies, patios, and small space backyards.
Now, real quickly, your novel, Garden Varieties, what for people who like a long format book, what is that about for those people who would want to sit down and really read a book?
Oh, sure. It's set in a community garden in Los Angeles, and it's the kind of thing that, when you throw a whole bunch of people together of different stripes, chaos ensues, and everyone's trying to get along in tight quarters. I peppered the whole story with gardening lessons throughout, so you learn something along the way as you're reading through this novel. It's an ensemble cast of characters. There's romance. There's life and death and all kinds of stuff going on. It's a fun read, and it's certainly something that people enjoyed reading through winter when they're waiting for last frost so that they can plant.
Well, some people, when you spoke about fruit trees there, some people might say, well, it's not that expensive. I can buy fruit at the farmer's market. Why should somebody grow their own fruit? What are some good reasons to start a fruit garden? What are some challenges one may face when trying to start a mini fruit garden?
That's a good question. I know that for some folks, it is, with the pest pressure or the critter pressure that is happening, like squirrels, that find your stone fruits and steal them all the way. It can be kind of disappointing to try and grow your own fruit. But for certain things, like I use examples like strawberries, because commercially they're grown with, it's a really severe impact on the planet. They're one of the most heavily pesticided crops in the market. And they also are picked young before they're really ripe, and then they're ripened indoors with ethylene gas. And so if you're growing your own strawberries, you're bypassing that whole process and all of those impacts on the planet and our environment by doing that yourself. Now, of course, if you're wanting to grow your own fruit, it's also a chance to grow things that aren't readily available in the market. I use the example of loquat trees, which is something you probably can't grow where you are, but I'm in a subtropical area. So loquat trees, their fruit is so easily bruised, they are never available in the market. So you have to grow it yourself if you want to do that. So for listeners in your area, that may be something like a really interesting and rare variety of quince or apples that are heritage varieties that you can't buy in the store, because that's really what gardening is all about, is growing stuff you can't buy at the store, isn't it?
Right. And you speak about the heavily pesticide. Our niece, when she tries to eat store-bought strawberries, she breaks out. When she ate our homegrown strawberries, she was fine. So there was something there, and that's probably just one of many different examples that people and our listeners can relate to. Yeah,
absolutely. I know a lot of people are sensitive to the chemicals that are used on fruits in agriculture, and so you can definitely curtail that issue by growing it yourself.
Just because you wash it off doesn't mean it removes the internal penetration of that chemical.
That's right. Yeah.
How can people, we appreciate the time you've offered us, Christy, how can people find out more about you? How can they get your books? Where can they find all that great information about you at?
Sure. If you can remember Garden Nerd, that's GARDENERD.com. You'll be able to find all the things. We've got YouTube videos, podcasts, blog, and my books are all for sale there, or they lead you to wherever your favorite bookseller is so you can get it from them locally.
Christy, we thank you so much for the time you've offered us and the education, not only for Holly and myself, but all of our listeners. We thank you for that.
Thank you. Have a good day.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.